You're a young bride named Margot, barely 15 years old. Standing in the doorway of a stone cottage in 1347 AD, your new husband, Henrik, approaches your marriage bed. They won't leave until they hear proof of consummation. A world where sexual practices were shaped by superstition, religious fear, and survival instincts that would seem utterly foreign to our modern understanding of romance and desire. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're re-exploring these ancient stories together, from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Your breath comes in short gasps as Henrik's callous fingers reach for the leather cord at your throat. You wonder if your mother's whispered warnings about wifely duties could possibly prepare you for what is about to happen in this cramped, smoky room that smells of wet wool and unwashed bodies. The rushes beneath your bare feet crackle with each nervous step. Candlelight flickers across his weathered face. He's nearly twice your age, chosen by your father for his 3 pigs and half an acre of barley. Your hands shake as you clutch the rough woolen shift your mother stitched for this very night, the same one she wore and her mother before her. The church's teachings clashed with pagan traditions, and the most intimate moments of human life were governed by rules so bizarre and restrictive that they would make a modern person's skin crawl. These weren't just personal choices, they were matters of eternal salvation, family honor, and literally life and death. Through the thin walls, you can hear his friends outside, drunk on ale, shouting crude encouragements and beating pots with wooden spoons. This is not a love story. This is the reality of medieval intimacy. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. The medieval bedroom was a battlefield where bodies became political territories. Let me take you back to Margit's world, where the concept of marital rape didn't exist because wives were seen as property. Menstrual blood was considered so dangerous it could kill crops, and the wrong sexual position could damn your soul to hell forever. In medieval Europe, the marriage bed was never truly private. The community, the church, and ancient superstitions all had a stake in what happened between husband and wife. When Margot married Henrik in that autumn of 1347 AD, their union wasn't celebrated with champagne and dancing. It was a business transaction sealed with bodily fluids, witnessed by neighbors who had every right to demand proof of consummation. The wedding night ritual began long before the couple touched. First came the bedding ceremony, where the wedding guests would literally drag the bride and groom to their chamber, undress them while singing body songs, and then stand outside the door listening for sounds that would confirm the marriage was legally binding. Henrik's friends wouldn't leave until they heard Margit's cries of pain, proof that her hymen had been broken and the marriage consummated. But here's where medieval intimacy gets truly strange. The church taught that even married couples could commit mortal sins in their own beds. Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval theologian, laid out explicit rules for married couples in his Summa Theologica around 1265 AD. Sexual intercourse was only acceptable on certain days of the week, during certain seasons, and in one specific position, man on top, woman beneath, face to face. Any deviation was considered unnatural and therefore sinful. Oral sex was forbidden, as was sex during menstruation, pregnancy, or while breastfeeding. The church calculated that if all these rules were followed, married couples would only be able to have sex about 50 days a year. Saint Jerome, writing in the 4th century AD, declared that a man who loves his wife passionately is an adulterer. The church fathers believed that excessive pleasure even within marriage corrupted the soul. This wasn't just a theoretical belief, it shaped every aspect of medieval sexual practice. Margot would have learned these rules from her mother, who learned them from the village priest during confession. The weight of eternal damnation hung over every intimate moment. When Henrik reached for her on a forbidden Wednesday during Lent, she faced an impossible choice: submit to her husband's will and risk her soul, or refuse and face his wrath in a world where domestic violence was not only legal but expected. The medieval understanding of female sexuality was based on fundamental misunderstandings that would persist for centuries. Medical texts from the time, influenced by ancient Greek and Roman sources, taught that women were essentially defective men. Their sexual organs were simply inverted versions of male genitalia. They thought the uterus could literally move around inside a woman's body, traveling upward to strangle her heart or downward to escape through her vagina. Treatments included fumigating the vagina with pleasant smells to lure the womb back into place or applying foul-smelling substances to the nose to drive it downward. The vagina was considered an inside-out penis, and the ovaries were viewed as internal testicles. This wasn't mere ignorance. It was codified medical knowledge taught at universities across Europe. These beliefs had serious consequences for how medieval people understood female desire and pleasure. The physician Constantine the African, writing in the 11th century AD, claimed that women experienced sexual pleasure differently than men. They required prolonged stimulation and multiple climaxes to conceive. This led to the bizarre medical belief that rape couldn't result in pregnancy because the woman couldn't achieve the necessary pleasure. If a woman became pregnant after sexual assault, medieval courts often took it as evidence that she had enjoyed the experience and was therefore partly responsible. Margaret's mother might have warned her about the wandering womb, a condition medieval physicians believed could cause hysteria, madness, and even death. The medieval period inherited a complex web of fertility beliefs from pagan traditions that the church never quite managed to eliminate. Village-wise women, often labeled as witches by later generations, maintained underground knowledge of herbs, rituals, and practices designed to encourage conception, prevent pregnancy, or ensure the birth of male children. In the forests surrounding Margaret's village, women would gather specific plants under the full moon. Pennyroyal and tansy were brewed into teas that could prevent pregnancy. Though the dosage between contraception and death was perilously thin, mandrake root, shaped like a human figure, was believed to increase fertility when worn as an amulet against the skin. The root was so valuable that forgeries made from carved briar were common in medieval markets. The church officially condemned these practices as witchcraft, but even devout Christians couldn't entirely abandon them. Women were taught to jump backwards 7 times after intercourse to prevent conception or to drink wine mixed with ground-up bees. More dangerous were the potions made from mercury, lead, and other toxic substances that often killed the woman along with any potential pregnancy. The line between folk medicine and magic was impossibly blurred. Maternal mortality rates were staggering. 1 in 3 women died during or shortly after delivery. For unmarried women, pregnancy often meant social destruction, exile, or death. The practice of infanticide, while officially condemned, was widely seen as a desperate woman's last resort. A woman might pray to St. Margaret for safe childbirth, while simultaneously burying a piece of afterbirth on her threshold to ensure future fertility. She might wear a crucifix to church while hiding a piece of amber between her breasts to prevent miscarriage. Medieval contraception was a dangerous mix of superstition, poison, and desperation. The consequences of unwanted pregnancy were severe. In a world without reliable contraception, women faced the constant threat of death during childbirth. Medieval marriage negotiations were conducted like military campaigns, with bodies as the primary battlefield. When Margaret's father arranged her marriage to Henrik, her virginity was literally her dowry. More valuable than any gold or livestock he could offer, the bloodied sheets would be displayed to the assembled crowd as proof that the marriage was legitimate. If no blood appeared, the bride could be returned to her family in disgrace, branded as unclean, or even killed for fraud. The pressure on young brides was enormous. Some would secretly prick their fingers or hide chicken blood to fake the evidence. Their new families demanded. The hymen became a currency of honor, traded between families as proof of their daughter's purity and their own reputation. They believed that the hymen was a solid membrane that completely blocked the vaginal opening, rather than the partial flexible tissue it actually is. A marriage wasn't considered legally binding until sexual intercourse had occurred. This meant that proving or disproving consummation became a matter of legal inquiry. Church courts would examine both husband and wife, interviewing them separately about intimate details of their wedding night. They would inspect the woman's body for signs of penetration and question neighbors about what they had heard through the walls. They thought that its absence was absolute proof of sexual activity, when in fact it can be torn by horseback riding, heavy lifting, or simply natural variation in anatomy. The wedding night wasn't just about consummation, it was about public verification of the bride's virginity. But medieval medicine's understanding of virginity was fundamentally flawed. The church's doctrine of consummation created its own bizarre practices. Medieval sexual positions were strictly regulated by church doctrine, but the reality was far more complex. The missionary position wasn't just preferred, it was the only position that wouldn't damn your soul to hell. The church taught that any position that put the woman on top was unnatural. Because it violated the established order of male dominance, rear entry was considered bestial, linking human sexuality to animal mating practices. Yet medieval literature hints at a more complex reality, the asterisk fabliaux asterisk. Body comic tales popular in medieval France describe sexual encounters that would have shocked church authorities. These stories, often told by traveling minstrels in taverns and market squares, reveal a hidden world where couples experimented with forbidden practices despite the threat of eternal damnation. The succubus and incubus were not just myths. They were seen as accepted medical and religious truths. Church leaders taught that these demons could take human form to seduce men and women, draining their life force through sexual acts. The succubus, a female demon, was blamed for nocturnal emissions, sexual dreams, and any sexual thoughts outside of marriage. Medieval theologians created detailed theories about how these demons operated. They believed that a demon could first take female form to collect semen from a man and then change into male form to impregnate a woman with the stolen seed. Any child born from such a union was thought to be cursed or demonic. The incubus was seen as an even greater threat to women. These male demons were believed to be physically stronger and could overpower their victims. Women who reported sexual dreams or experiences they couldn't explain were often accused of consorting with demons. The line between victim and which was disturbingly thin. Sleep paralysis, now known as a neurological phenomenon, was viewed as demonic sexual assault. Men and women who woke unable to move, often feeling pressure on their chest, were believed to be under demonic attack. The church recommended elaborate rituals for exorcism and purification, but many suspected victims were instead burned as witches. The French poet Andreas Capellanus, writing around 1184 AD, described elaborate courtship rituals that included detailed instructions for sexual positions and techniques. His work suggests that at least among the nobility, there was a sophisticated understanding of sexual pleasure that went far beyond the church's restrictive teachings. However, these practices were dangerous secrets. Discovery could mean excommunication, exile, or death. Medieval people were afraid of sexual demons they thought preyed on humans during vulnerable moments. The medieval understanding of menstruation was rooted in fear and superstition that lasted for centuries. Menstrual blood was thought to be poison, so toxic that it could kill crops, spoil wine, and cause men to lose their virility. They used moss, cloth rags, and sheepskin for basic menstrual protection. Physicians believed that sexual pleasure and fertility depended on the right balance of hot and cold, wet and dry humors in both partners. A hot husband might be incompatible with a cold wife, leading to sexual dysfunction and infertility. Physical examinations of potential spouses were common among wealthy families. Physicians checked the bride's body for signs of her sexual temperament. Wide hips were seen as a sign of fertility, while narrow hips suggested barrenness. The groom's penis size and shape were examined for compatibility with his future bride. These checks were conducted with the same clinical detachment used for livestock. They tracked their cycles by the phases of the moon and created herbal remedies to ease cramps and regulate flow. This knowledge was passed down through generations of women, kept hidden from male doctors and church authorities who might condemn it as witchcraft. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, whose works were studied in medieval universities, claimed that menstrual blood could drive dogs mad and dull knives. Women during their monthly cycles were seen as dangerous pollutants who needed to be isolated from society. They could not enter churches, prepare food, or touch sacred objects. In many villages, menstruating women were required to stay in special huts outside the community until their bleeding stopped. The church taught that menstruation was God's punishment for Eve's original sin, making every monthly cycle a reminder of feminine shame. The lack of knowledge about menstruation led to strange medical practices. Physicians believed that menstrual blood not properly expelling would build up and poison the woman from within. They suggested bloodletting, purging, and other risky treatments to balance female humors. Some doctors even recommended sexual intercourse as a cure for menstrual issues, thinking that male seed could counteract the harmful effects of menstrual blood. Medieval women developed their own knowledge for managing their cycles. The medieval period also saw the rise of detailed theories about sexual compatibility, based on astrological signs, bodily humors, and physical traits. Church authorities had their own theories about sexual compatibility based on spiritual traits, rather than physical ones. They taught that closely related couples, whether by blood or spiritual ties, would be cursed with sexual problems and monstrous children. Rape was defined not as a crime, against the woman, but as a crime against the man who owned her, whether her father, husband, or lord. The punishment for rape varied dramatically based on the social status of both the victim and the perpetrator. A nobleman who raped a peasant woman might pay a small fine, while a peasant who raped a noblewoman would face torture and death. Adultery was punished even more harshly, but only for women. Medieval law explicitly gave husbands the right to kill adulterous wives and their lovers if caught in the act. Men, on the other hand, could generally have sex with unmarried women, prostitutes, or servants without facing legal penalties. The complex rules about kinship meant that many medieval marriages were annulled when unknown family connections were discovered. Medieval sexuality was deeply intertwined with notions of honor, shame, and social status. A man's sexual prowess was directly tied to his reputation as a warrior and leader. Impotence was not just a personal failure. It could also bring public embarrassment that ruined a man's standing in his community. Medieval French society created elaborate euphemisms for sexual dysfunction, inventing a language of shame that influenced every part of social interaction. For women, sexual reputation was even more fragile. The slightest hint of impropriety could destroy a woman's marriage prospects and her family's honor. Medieval towns were small communities where everyone knew everyone's business. A woman seen talking to a man who wasn't he her husband or relative could be labeled a whore. The standards for female behavior were so strict that even married women lived in constant fear of gossip and accusation. The medieval legal system reflected these sexual anxieties in its treatment of rape, adultery, and sexual assault. The medieval period also saw the development of complex courtship rituals that would influence European culture for centuries. The idea of courtly love promoted in troubadour poetry created a parallel world where sexual desire became a spiritual quest. A village girl might prefer the blacksmith's son, but if the miller offered better terms to her father, she would marry a man she barely knew. These practices went underground due to Christian persecution, but never entirely vanished. Medieval peasants continued ancient fertility rituals, often disguised as Christian celebrations or incorporated into folk medicine. The celebration of May Day held strong sexual themes despite church efforts to suppress it. Young people would spend the night in the forest, supposedly gathering flowers and branches to decorate the village. In reality, May Day was an opportunity for sexual exploration and courtship away from community restrictions. Many pregnancies were believed to result from May Day encounters, leading to a spike in February births. Medieval engagement practices included rituals to test the compatibility of potential spouses. In some areas, engaged couples could sleep together clothed, but separated by a wooden board called a bundling board. This allowed families to assess whether the couple was physically compatible without risking pregnancy or breaking church rules about premarital sex. These romantic ideals mainly existed as a literary fantasy for the nobility, yet they significantly influenced how medieval people viewed the connection between love and sexuality. The courtly love tradition suggested that true love can only exist outside of marriage. A knight's devotion to his lady was meant to remain eternally unfulfilled, creating a state of longing thought to purify the soul through suffering. This led to a strange divide between marital sexuality, which was purely practical, and romantic love, which was entirely spiritual. In reality, medieval courtship was much more practical. Among peasants, young people might have some influence over choosing their marriage partners, but economic factors always took precedence. The medieval period inherited a blend of sexual magic and fertility rituals from earlier pagan cultures. Wedding celebrations included many fertility rituals aimed at increasing the couple's chances of having children. The bride might be showered with grain or nuts to promote pregnancy. Medieval physicians believed that both men and women produce seed that combined during sex to create new life. They taught that female orgasm was necessary for conception, leading to the mistaken belief that women who became pregnant after rape must have enjoyed the act. Medical texts included detailed descriptions of sexual positions and techniques, but these were only accessible to educated doctors and wealthy patrons. The average medieval person learned about sex through whispered conversations, folk songs, and the reality of trial and error. The church also produced its own sexual literature, but it mainly focused on listing sins rather than giving positive advice. Medieval people developed elaborate theories on how to influence the sex of unborn children. They believed that conception during certain moon phases would produce boys, while other phases would yield girls. The arrangement of the stars at conception was thought to affect not only the child's gender, but also their character and future prospects. The marriage bed would be blessed with holy water, but also secretly prepared with herbs and charms thought to enhance fertility. These practices were desperate efforts to control reproduction in a world where high infant mortality was common and family survival depended on having healthy children. The medieval understanding of conception was a mix of Aristotelian thought, Christian doctrine, and folk wisdom. The medieval era saw increasingly complex methods of sexual control and surveillance. The church set up networks of informants to report on their neighbors' private lives. Confession became a tool for gathering intimate details about sexual practices, with priests questioning penitents about their most personal moments. The rise of the Inquisition in the 13th century brought new levels of sexual persecution. Suspected heretics were tortured into confessing not only their religious beliefs, but also their sexual practices. The interrogation manuals used by inquisitors contained detailed questions about sexual positions, frequency of intercourse, and even physical sensations experienced during sex. Medieval prisons had special punishments for sexual crimes. Women convicted of adultery might be imprisoned in cages too small to stand in, surviving only on bread and water until they starved. Men convicted of rape might be publicly castrated before being hanged. These extreme punishments were not just for punishment, they aimed to intimidate the entire community into sexual compliance. The medieval period produced a wealth of literature on sexual advice, though most of it was hidden from ordinary people. Penitential manuals listed hundreds of sexual practices with their corresponding punishments. These texts show a curiosity about sexual details that goes against the Church's official stance on celibacy and purity. These texts provided advice on everything from wedding night techniques to managing sexual relationships during pregnancy. The chastity belt, though likely less common than popular belief suggests, stands for extreme measures taken by some medieval people to control female sexuality. These devices were not just physical restraints, they symbolized the fear surrounding female sexual independence. The rite of first night, or droner, supposedly gave feudal lords the authority to have sex with their peasants' brides on their wedding night, while historians debate its actual existence. The mere possibility highlights the complete sexual vulnerability of medieval peasant women. Young people were rarely allowed to be alone together, and married couples needed to conduct their intimate lives according to community standards. They used fasting, cold baths, and physical discomfort to suppress urges. Young people were trained to avoid situations that might lead to sexual arousal, including certain foods, music, and forms of entertainment. Medieval views on sexual pleasure were deeply influenced by religious teachings about the soul and body. The church taught that sexual pleasure was a trap set by the devil to divert humans from spiritual contemplation. Even within marriage, enjoying sex too much was seen as a sin that could send the soul to hell. They show a deep understanding of sexual pleasure that was hidden from the general public, but clearly practiced by those who could afford privacy. Kings and nobles sought advice from astrologers about the best times for sex, believing that the cosmic forces at conception would influence their children's destinies. Army commanders sometimes ordered soldiers to refrain from sex before battles, thinking sexual activity would deplete their fighting strength. Medieval marriage manuals created for wealthy patrons reveal glimpses into the sexual lives of the nobility. During the medieval period, more complex methods of sexual punishment and control emerged. Cities maintained official red light districts where prostitutes worked under government supervision. Women were required to wear distinctive clothing, live in specific areas, and undergo regular medical checks. Medieval brothels existed in both legal and illegal forms. The church officially condemned prostitution, but secular authorities often licensed and regulated it. The medieval period also saw some of the most unusual sexual customs in European history. People in that era believed sexual practices could affect everything from the weather to the success of military campaigns. Communities developed complex systems of social pressure to regulate sexual behavior. People developed various techniques to manage sexual desire and control their bodies. Despite the church's attempts to control sexuality, the medieval period produced a vast underground culture of sexual rebellion. People found ways to express their desires and seek pleasure. The lack of privacy in homes meant sexual intercourse often happened in spaces shared with children, servants, and extended family. The sounds and smells of sex were part of daily life in ways that would shock modern sensibilities. People found ways to seek pleasure and express desires despite the strong social pressure to adhere to religious and social expectations. This hidden world of sexual freedom coexisted alongside the official culture of repression. We can see her terror not just as personal fear, but as the weight of an entire culture as sexual anxieties pressing down on her. The bedroom became a battlefield where souls were won and lost, where family honor was either defended or ruined, and where the most private moments of human life were governed by rules designed to eliminate pleasure and maximize suffering. She carries the burdens of religious doctrine, family honor, community oversight, and her own desperate need for survival in a world that offers little protection. The sexual privileges of the nobility were part of their broader dominance. Lords and ladies could access private chambers, exotic foods, and leisure time that allowed them to explore sexual pleasure in ways peasants could not. Medieval marriage was ultimately about survival, not love or sexual satisfaction. With short life expectancies and high infant mortality, marriage's main goal was to produce children who could inherit the family name and work the land. Sex was a secondary concern, often seen as a dangerous distraction from more pressing matters. Medieval sexuality was shaped by practical factors that modern people may overlook. Complex relationships emerged between sexuality and social class. Although the medieval period produced some of the most restrictive sexual customs in European history, it also saw the emergence of forms of sexual resistance and rebellion. As we return to Margot in her stone cottage with Henrik's hands reaching for her, in the flickering candlelight, the medieval period reminds us that human sexuality has always been influenced by power, fear, and social control. The strange practices and beliefs of medieval people may seem foreign now, but they stem from the same basic human needs that drive sexual behavior today. Understanding medieval sexuality helps us see how our own sexual culture reflects contemporary power structures and social anxieties. Medieval intimacy was never truly intimate. It was always public, political, and often dangerous. While the medieval period created some of the most restrictive sexual customs, it also revealed the remarkable resilience of human sexual desire. In the face of centuries of religious oppression and social control, medieval people still sought love, pleasure, and connection. Their experiences remind us that sexuality is a fundamental aspect of being human, too strong to be entirely regulated by any authority. The strange intimate practices of medieval people were their efforts to navigate the ongoing conflicts between desire and control, pleasure and danger, love and survival. This moment carries the full weight of medieval sexual culture: the fear, the superstition, the desperate hope for survival, and the timeless human longing for connection despite overwhelming odds. In their trembling hands and calloused fingers, we see more than just the individuals. We witness the clash of an entire civilization, as sexual anxieties and desires unfolding in the most intimate space imaginable, yet it remains never truly private, never truly safe. Their struggles remind us that the fight for sexual freedom and true intimacy is not a modern concept, but a long-standing human aspiration that transcends specific historical moments. The bizarre and often troubling sexual practices of medieval Europe were not just products of ignorance or superstition. They arose from a mix of religious beliefs, social structures, economic needs, and genuine human desires. Understanding these practices helps us appreciate how far we have come and recognize that many of the same tensions still influence human sexuality today. Ultimately, the medieval period teaches us that sexuality is always political, always risky, and always a vital part of human experience. The candlelight flickers across Henrik's weathered face as he reaches for young Margot.